I arrived early, as I always do. Old habits don't loosen their grip just because your hair has turned silver. I still believe it is impolite to arrive exactly on time, as though you are rushing someone. 10 minutes early is respectful. 15, if there will be children. That evening, I arrived 20 minutes early, standing on the front porch with a wrapped tin of almond shortbread balanced against my hip, the cold seeping gently through the soles of my sensible shoes. Snow clung to the hedges like lace left out overnight. Inside the house, warm light glowed through tall windows, amber and inviting, the kind that suggests laughter and music even before you step inside. I remember thinking, good. This will be a good night. I had practiced that thought the whole drive over. Christmas dinner was not new to me. I had hosted dozens in my lifetime, perhaps hundreds if you counted the smaller gatherings, the impromptu ones when neighbors came by, the years when my husband was still alive and our home seemed endlessly full. But this Christmas was different. This Christmas was not in my home. It was in theirs. My daughter had insisted. "Mom, please," she'd said gently, but firmly. "They're hosting this year. It means a lot to Daniel." Daniel. My son-in-law. I had smiled on the phone, told her of course, told her I was looking forward to it. I meant it too. Or at least I wanted to. When the door opened, warmth rushed out first, followed by the sound of voices and a burst of music I didn't recognize. Something orchestral, dramatic, meant to impress rather than soothe. My daughter's face appeared, flushed and bright, eyes lighting up when she saw me. "Mom, you made it early," she said, pulling me into a careful hug that smelled faintly of rosemary and citrus. "I brought cookies," I said, lifting the tin slightly. "Old-fashioned. I hope that's all right." "Of course it is," she replied, though her eyes flicked briefly toward the kitchen, as if checking for approval that wasn't needed. Inside, the house was immaculate. Not tidy. Not cozy. Immaculate in the way hotel lobbies are immaculate. No fingerprints, no clutter, no evidence of ordinary life. The furniture was pale and sharp-edged. The decorations were tasteful to the point of sterility. Even the Christmas tree looked curated, each ornament spaced just so, silver and white and glass, no handmade paper stars or lopsided angels in sight. I smoothed my coat, suddenly aware of how practical it looked among all that polish. Daniel appeared from the dining room, his smile already in place, practiced and gleaming. He wore a tailored sweater and spoke before he fully reached us, projecting confidence the way some men project warmth. "There you are," he said. "You found the place all right?" "Yes, thank you," I replied. "It's lovely." He nodded once, as though my approval were a small thing, easily noted and easily dismissed. "My parents will be here any minute," he added, adjusting the placement of a centerpiece candle with 2 fingers. "There. Particular." The word hung there. Particular. I smiled. "I'm sure dinner will be wonderful." He glanced at the tin in my hands. "Oh, you didn't have to bring anything." "I wanted to," I said simply. "Well," he replied, already turning away, "we have a dessert course planned, but I suppose we can set them out somewhere." Somewhere. My daughter met my eyes briefly, a flicker of apology passing between us like a whispered sentence. I squeezed her hand. It was all right. I had lived long enough to recognize small dismissals for what they were, and to know when they were worth addressing. The doorbell rang not 5 minutes later. Daniel straightened as if a string had been pulled through his spine. The music was adjusted, louder, grander. He glanced once at my daughter, once at me, then strode to the door with the air of a man about to perform. His parents entered in a swirl of cold air and expensive wool. They were elegant in that quiet, unbothered way, people who had never needed to raise their voices to be heard. His mother's coat was camel-colored and perfectly cut. His father's handshake was firm, brief, practiced. Introductions were made. "This is my wife, of course," Daniel said, resting a proprietary hand on my daughter's back. "And this is her mother." Her mother. No name. Just a role. I smiled anyway, offering my hand. It's lovely to finally meet you. His mother's gaze skimmed me politely, landing somewhere between my face and my sensible shoes. Yes, well. Merry Christmas, she said. Dinner preparations began immediately, the kitchen becoming a choreography of movements. I offered to help, wash something, carry something, anything, but Daniel waved me off with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Please, just relax, he said. This is a formal setup. I retreated to the living room, sitting carefully on the edge of a pale sofa that looked like it had never known the weight of a real body. I folded my hands in my lap and listened. Conversation floated in from the dining room, investment portfolios, private schools, travel plans postponed and resumed. Names of places I had visited, quietly, long ago, but did not mention. There was laughter, but it was sharp-edged, competitive, each story subtly trying to outshine the last. When dinner was announced, we took our places around the long table. Place cards had been arranged in careful calligraphy. Mine read simply, Mother, not even Mom. The table itself was stunning. Linen pressed crisp as paper. Silverware arranged in disciplined ranks. Candles flickering softly, reflected endlessly in polished surfaces. The food smelled exquisite, herb-roasted turkey, citrus-glazed carrots, something rich and buttery that made my stomach tighten pleasantly. I sat up straighter, smoothed my napkin across my lap, and reminded myself to enjoy the evening. For a few minutes, it worked. Wine was poured. Compliments exchanged. Daniel was in his element, explaining the menu, the sourcing of ingredients, the chef he'd consulted. His parents nodded approvingly, pride evident in every small gesture. Then, somewhere between the salad and the main course, Daniel's attention turned toward me. So, he said lightly, carving knife poised in his hand, tell my parents what you do. Or did, I suppose. There it was. The shift. I felt it before I understood it. The subtle tightening of the air, the way my daughter's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. I smiled calmly. I'm retired now, I said. I spent many years working. Yes, but doing what? He pressed, a chuckle in his voice, eyes flicking toward his parents. I mean, Mom here likes to keep busy, but it's not exactly corporate. His mother smiled thinly. His father leaned back, interested. I opened my mouth to answer, and Daniel laughed. Softly, indulgently. Oh, don't worry, he added. It's just, we're a very driven family. Ambitious. It's important to set expectations. I closed my mouth again, the taste of rosemary and salt suddenly fading. Around that table, with candles burning and silver gleaming, something quiet settled into place. Not anger. Not yet. Just the deep, steady awareness that the evening had shifted, and that I was no longer a guest, but a prop. And Daniel, in his eagerness to impress, had no idea what door he had just opened. There is a particular sound people make when they believe they are being kind while doing something cruel. It is a soft laugh. A half smile. A tone that suggests generosity, even as it strips you of your shape and leaves you smaller than you were before. I recognized it immediately, because I had heard it many times in my life, most often from men who mistook confidence for character. Daniel was very good at that sound. Well, he continued, still smiling, Mom grew up in a very different time. Different world, really. He carved the turkey with deliberate care, as though each slice required commentary. Back then, stability mattered more than success. His father nodded thoughtfully, folding his napkin. Of course. People did what they had to do. Yes, Daniel agreed quickly. Exactly. It's admirable in its own way. In its own way. I felt my daughter's knee brush against mine beneath the table, a small, unconscious plea. Don't. Please don't make this worse. I placed my hand over hers briefly, a quiet reassurance. I was all right. I had survived worse than polite condescension served with gravy. But Daniel was warming to his audience. You know, he said, glancing at his mother, I've always said resilience is a kind of success too. even if it doesn't scale. His parents laughed lightly, not unkindly, not cruelly, in their minds, just amused. I took a sip of water, cool and steadying. I had learned long ago not to rush my responses. Silence, when used properly, unsettles people who rely on momentum. "And what about you?" his mother asked me suddenly, perhaps sensing the imbalance and wishing to appear gracious. "You must have enjoyed staying busy with your home, your family." "Yes," I said. "Very much." Daniel leaned back, satisfied. "She was always very practical," he added. "Never one for big risks." That was the moment something inside me shifted, not sharply, not loudly, but with the quiet click of a lock turning. I had taken risks. Immense ones. Risks that had cost me sleep, comfort, and once, nearly my marriage. Risks that had required me to walk into rooms where I was the only woman, the only one without inherited confidence or a familiar last name. But those risks were not visible on my hands, and so Daniel assumed they had never been taken. The conversation moved on, as it always does, to achievements that could be measured aloud. Promotions. Acquisitions. The cleverness of avoiding losses rather than learning from them. Daniel spoke eagerly, leaning forward, his voice growing brighter with each nod of approval from his parents. My daughter said little. She cut her food into small, careful pieces and listened. At one point, Daniel gestured toward me again. "See, that's the difference," he said. "Some people are content with enough. Others want more." He smiled at me as he said it, as if inviting agreement. I returned the smile, equally pleasant. "Contentment is underrated," I replied. He laughed. Spoken like someone who's never chased scale. The table laughed with him. I felt it then, not humiliation exactly, but its quieter cousin, erasure. The sense that my presence had been reduced to a contrast, a lesson, a harmless example of what not to become. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. The meal continued, rich and perfectly timed, yet I tasted very little of it. The candles burned lower. Wine glasses were refilled. Stories grew bolder. And still, Daniel returned to me, again and again, as though I were an anecdote he couldn't resist improving. "You should have seen her old car," he said at one point, chuckling. "Ran forever, I'll give it that. But comfort clearly wasn't a priority." His father smiled. "Reliability has its merits." "Sure," Daniel said. "But there's a reason some of us move on." That was when I realized something important. Daniel did not dislike me. He found me useful. I was the humble origin story that made his ascent look steeper. The modest beginning that justified his polish. The quiet, manageable woman he believed would never disrupt the narrative he was performing for his parents. And I could have corrected him. Easily. I could have named institutions, dates, titles. I could have watched the color drain from his face and ended it all right there between the potatoes and the cranberry sauce. But I didn't. Because I have learned that truth, when delivered too early, is treated like a party trick. I waited. Dessert was announced. A layered confection, glossy and precise. Daniel stood to serve it himself, explaining the process as though narrating a presentation. "And of course," he said lightly, "we'll skip the cookies tonight. Too nostalgic." His mother smiled approvingly. I watched my daughter's face fall, just slightly. That was when I spoke again, my voice calm, even warm. "Oh," I said, "that's all right. We can save them for later. Some things are better appreciated when the room is quieter." Daniel glanced at me, puzzled, then shrugged. "If you like." The plates were cleared. Coffee was poured. The evening had reached that point where defenses soften and egos stretch comfortably across the table. And I sat there, patient as I have always been, knowing something Daniel did not. I had spent my life building things that did not need applause to endure. And very soon, he was going to learn exactly what that meant. Coffee changes a room. It slows people down, loosens the careful posture they've been holding since the first course, gives them permission to lean back and speak as though the evening has already been decided. The candles had burned low by then, their flames small and wavering, casting shadows that softened even the sharpest edges of that immaculate dining room. Daniel's parents were relaxed now. His father spoke about legacy, about building something that would last beyond one lifetime. His mother added thoughtful comments about stewardship, about choosing the right people to carry things forward. I listened quietly. Legacy is a word people like to use when they believe it belongs to them. At some point, Daniel excused himself to take a call. He stepped into the hallway, his voice dropping into that brisk, professional register he reserved for people he considered peers. The room exhaled in his absence. My daughter looked at me then, really looked at me, her eyes searching my face. There was worry there. Embarrassment. A question she was afraid to ask. I reached across the table and covered her hand. "I'm all right," I said softly. She nodded, though her lips pressed together. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think he would." "I know," I said. And I did. His parents shifted their attention toward me, perhaps sensing an opening now that their son had stepped away. His mother tilted her head slightly. "You've been very gracious this evening," she said. "Not everyone is comfortable in conversations like this." "Comfort comes with time," I replied. "With exposure," his father added. "The right environments." "Yes," I agreed. "And the right challenges." They seemed surprised by the firmness in my voice, though it remained gentle. His mother smiled again, a touch more curious this time. "And what challenges were most important to you?" she asked. The question was genuine. Or at least, it was closer to genuine than any that had come before. I set my cup down carefully. Porcelain makes a particular sound when it meets wood, soft, but final. I had spent the evening allowing others to shape the conversation. I decided then to shape one small corner of it myself. "I learned early," I said, "that if I wanted stability, I would have to create it. There was no one else to do it for me." They listened. "So I worked," I continued. "I studied when I could. I took positions others passed over because they seemed dull or too demanding. I learned how systems worked, how money moved, how decisions were made." His father leaned forward slightly now. "And where was this?" he asked. "In a place most people don't associate with opportunity," I replied. "Which, I suppose, made it ideal. Fewer eyes. Fewer assumptions." Daniel's mother's gaze sharpened, interest replacing politeness. "You sound as though you had quite a career," she said. "I did," I answered simply. The hallway door opened then, and Daniel returned, phone tucked away, confidence fully restored. He took his seat and glanced between us, sensing a shift he couldn't quite name. "What did I miss?" he asked lightly. "Your mother-in-law was just telling us about her work," his father said. Daniel smiled indulgently. "Oh." I met his eyes. Calm. Steady. Unprovoked. "Yes," I said. "We were speaking about challenges." "Well," Daniel chuckled, lifting his cup, "I'm sure there were plenty. Life has a way of humbling us all." "Indeed," I said. "Especially when we underestimate people." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or the briefest irritation, but he recovered quickly. His mother cleared her throat. "You never mentioned what field you were in," she said to me. I paused. "Not for drama. For accuracy." "Finance," I said. Daniel laughed outright. "Finance." He shook his head, amused. "I think Mom means budgeting. She was always very good with household accounts." His father did not laugh. "Finance is a broad term," he said carefully. "What area?" I kept my voice even. "Risk management. Long-term asset structuring. Eventually, oversight." The table grew quiet. Daniel's smile faltered, just slightly. "That's quite a description." It was a long career, I replied. Descriptions tend to accumulate. His mother's fingers tightened around her cup. Where did you work? She asked. I named the institution. Not loudly. Not triumphantly. Just clearly. His father's expression changed immediately. Recognition is unmistakable when it arrives. It straightens the spine. It sharpens the eyes. That's significant, he said slowly. Yes, I replied. It was. Daniel stared at me now, confusion giving way to disbelief. That's not. He stopped himself, laughed again, but the sound lacked its earlier ease. You never said. You never asked, I said gently. Silence settled over the table, heavier now, more deliberate. His mother spoke next, her tone altered. And your role there? I considered the question, then answered honestly. I started small, I said. But I retired as one of the people responsible for deciding which ventures were worth protecting, and which were not. Daniel swallowed. His father leaned back slowly, a thoughtful look crossing his face. That explains your perspective on contentment, he said. There's a difference between ambition and discernment. I inclined my head. There is. Daniel shifted in his chair, the performance unraveling thread by thread. For the first time that evening, he looked at me not as a backdrop, but as a variable he had failed to calculate. The room felt different now. Not triumphant. Not cruel. Just clear. And in that clarity, Daniel finally understood something he had missed all night. I had not been silent because I was small. I had been silent because I knew exactly when to speak. The rest of the evening moved slowly, almost ceremoniously. Not because anything else had changed in the dining room, the food, the decor, the careful lighting, but because the atmosphere itself had shifted. It was no longer a performance for Daniel's parents. It was now a stage for truth, and I was the only actor required. Daniel was polite, of course, but the effortless confidence he had carried into the room that evening had begun to waver. He asked fewer questions, laughed less, and when he did, it was quieter, cautious. Every glance he cast my way carried a measure of reconsideration, an unspoken calculation of the error he had made in judging me. I finished my coffee slowly, savoring the warmth, the aroma, the sense of control it gave me. There is a peculiar satisfaction in observing someone learn humility not through confrontation, but through subtle revelation. My daughter sat beside me, relief and admiration mingling in her eyes. She squeezed my hand lightly, a silent acknowledgement that the balance had shifted. I must say, Daniel's mother remarked quietly, a trace of admiration in her voice, I underestimated you. I inclined my head, smiling just enough to convey warmth but not triumph. That tends to happen, I said softly. Especially when people assume appearances tell the whole story. His father nodded in agreement, but his eyes twinkled with amusement as if to say, well played. Daniel remained silent, a rare pause in the torrent of his self-assurance. He had learned more in the last half hour than he ever could have imagined. Lessons about assumptions, respect, and the dangers of underestimating a woman who knows her worth. Dessert was served, and for the first time that evening, I allowed myself a small bite of the almond shortbread I had brought. Its sweetness was familiar, comforting, a reminder of my own history, my own choices, and the life I had built. Daniel noticed, of course. He paused mid-conversation, his eyes flicking to the tin I had left on the sideboard, now half empty. I offered him a polite nod, as if inviting him to consider the irony of the situation. By the time the evening drew to a close, the tension had transformed into a quiet respect. Daniel's parents lingered near the doorway, speaking in subdued tones about investments and family, but with frequent glances in my direction that carried a newly acquired understanding. They were no longer the audience to Daniel's performance. They were witnesses to the truth, one he had been too blind to see. As coats were donned and farewells exchanged, I noticed Daniel's posture had shifted entirely. No longer the unshakable, polished son-in-law. He was a man aware that his assumptions had failed him. He shook my hand, and for the first time that evening, His grip carried respect instead of dismissive charm. Outside, the cold had deepened. Snow sparkled in the streetlights as I wrapped my scarf snugly around my neck. My daughter walked beside me, leaning close to whisper, "Mom, thank you." I smiled. "It's always been my pleasure," I said and meant it. I knew, even as we turned to walk toward our car, that the evening would be remembered. Not for the dishes, not for the decor, not even for the humiliation Daniel had tried to wield, but for the quiet justice I had delivered without raising my voice. For the calm assertion of dignity that cannot be bought, borrowed, or faked. And as I stepped into the night, snow crunching underfoot, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had proven something to them. Not even because I had proven something to Daniel. But because I had stayed true to myself. That is the kind of Christmas gift that lasts far longer than any ornament or dessert. A gift of respect, earned not through confrontation, but through patience, poise, and the perfectly timed revelation of the truth. Some lessons are learned slowly. Some victories arrive quietly. And some people, those who underestimate the quiet ones, never forget the moment they did. That night, I knew I had delivered mine.